Welcome to the Human Nature Channel. I'm your host, Alex Tamsula, also known as Daddy Baby on Twitter. And what am I doing here? Well, I'm here to tell you no farm garage video this week. Sorry, the knit hat was the best I could do. My car was in the shop for inspection, and I had this agreement with Dad that if I didn't get the car back until late, I could stay in Pittsburgh. Well, on Tuesday, at about 2:45 in the afternoon, I finally get the car back, and I remember thinking, that's late. The great thing about Dad is he's cool with me doing video and sometimes needing extra time, and he's even offered this. If you have to stay home on a Tuesday to get some of your stuff done, go ahead. I've taken him up on that twice. Besides, if Dad really needs me, I can be up there any day of the week. So, fear not, fans of agrarian living. The farm garage will be back next week. So anyway, picking up where we left off in the last farm garage video, I was talking about being perplexed by the fact that in December of 2020, I read S.I. Hayakawa's Language and Thought in Action and could have sworn I was reading it for the first time. And it turns out not to be the case, as I found out. This has never happened to me before. I've been reading all my life. I'm a big reader compared to the average, I guess. But any book I've read, I have a pretty good idea where I was when I read it and when I read it. I read The Exorcist in paperback in high school. Wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Read The Godfather twice. Second time I read it, I just finished reading this book on how to write the best-selling novel, and it was on the reading list. I remember reading Moby Dick in high school. I remember reading Ulysses in college. I remember reading I, the Jury on trips to the can. I don't forget reading books normally, but in this particular case, completely blanked on reading this. First time I read it was 2018. Now, in context, back then the Human Nature Channel was deep into doing videos about the Las Vegas shooting. And the Las Vegas shooting truth community talked about those guys a lot. I think I was using what was in this book and applying it to that situation. And it's funny, I found this video of me talking about the book, and quite clearly I knew what was in it then, and I knew what was in it later. I just don't know what happened in between. So, we'll finish up tonight by once again mentioning S.I. Hayakawa's Language in Thought in Action. I will put on my social engineer hat for this. Woo woo! Anyway, what made Hayakawa's book interesting to me is he identifies ways in which we use language that are almost automatic processes inside us. And he gives these processes names. Abstraction, for example. We never notice how we or the people around us or what is said in media goes from low abstraction to high abstraction and back again all the time. We don't stop and think about these things because if we did, we'd probably not be able to speak. But knowing about the constant process of abstraction adds a previously unseen dimension to communication. Hayakawa explains how abstraction of language involves a value orientation. First off, there is the to-valued orientation, and it's very easy to understand. Good versus evil, us versus them, Federalists versus anti-federalists, capitalism versus communism, Coke versus Pepsi, shooters on the ground versus single shooter in the hotel, everybody versus Mike Turber. It is the lowest level of abstraction because it is the most simplistic. And I hope it isn't lost on you that this happens to be the level at which political campaigns operate. Republican versus Democrat. What else do you need to know? Hayakawa then takes us to the next stage, which is multi-valued orientation. That's the level of more accurate descriptions of reality. The map is not the territory, so how good is your map anyway? World War II was not simply liberty versus fascism. It also had something to do with the U.S. government prior to the war, putting the squeeze on Japan's oil supplies with embargoes of shipments, prompting an already militarized nation like Japan into striking back. The world is not black and white in the ways politicians describe it to us. And the politicians know this. They're not that stupid. But they instinctively understand that it's easier to persuade people with a two-valued orientation because a two-valued orientation aims directly at the gut. Sadly, when that happens, most people have left their critical thinking skills with the hat check girl. I'll tell you what's got me worried now. I may have read this 3 times. Monday night, I'm on the phone with my invisible partner. He's part of my mastermind group, if you ever read Think and Grow Rich. He's a great sounding board. And we were talking about possible reasons behind my epic forgetfulness. Well, let's just get the most obvious one out there. You're getting old there, Alex. You were having a senior moment there, Granddad. We're all going to end up like you eventually. Will you still need me? Will you still feed me? When I'm 64, boom, boom. This is like giving a video camera and editing software to a guy with Tourette's syndrome, isn't it? Anyway, the second possible reason behind me forgetting that I read Language and Thought in Action may have something to do with context. Imagine you're back in school, high school, college, and you have a test the next day and you're cramming for it. You are reading all of the course material you should have read 2 weeks ago and you stay up all night doing it. The next day you take the test. You may even have done well on it, but as soon as you leave the classroom, you're going to forget everything you were cramming into your head the night before. That is a poor way to learn, because all you're really doing is temporarily retaining information and then the next day regurgitating it. You won't have any understanding. You won't retain anything. So, going back to 2018, something similar may have happened to me, because at the time I was heavily invested into doing videos on the Las Vegas shooting and talking about the Las Vegas shooting truth community as a group. I was always looking for ideas, and I guess I picked up a copy of Language and Thought in Action, and I'm reading it for something I could use. Now, at the time, the Las Vegas shooting truth community resembled the Hatfields and the McCoys. You had the Paladin group over here that was saying Paddock was a patsy. He was dead on the floor of that hotel room for hours. Somebody else did the shooting. And then you had the other group over here, Mike Turber and his associate, saying, if there was a second shooter, explain how he got out of that hotel room. You can't do it. So, as I'm reading Language and Thought in Action, and I came across the idea of two-valued logic, I said, hey, I can apply that. Because two-valued logic, as opposed to multi-valued logic, where you have multiple points of view orbiting around an issue, two-valued logic is the logic of the battlefield. It's the logic of us versus them. It's the logic of political campaigns and political arguments. It's the logic of a football game. It's not good, it's not necessarily bad, it just is. And at that level, you end up dealing with a lot of abstractions, and that's really all you do. So I think what was happening was I was reading Language and Thought in Action quickly, found what I needed, and then put it aside and immediately forgotten everything that I retained from it after that point. And there's another aspect to this too. Language and Thought in Action is a book about propaganda. Understanding propaganda, being able to decode propaganda when you see it, is what this book is all about. Now, I'm not looking at the Las Vegas shooting truth community as a group of people that's putting out propaganda. I didn't see it that way. I don't particularly believe that's the case. Maybe you can find some examples of it, but I never connected the propaganda side of the book with what I was seeing in the Las Vegas shooting truth community. Fast forward to December 2020. By this point, I have seen how the news media has treated Donald Trump, and it's pretty obvious that it was always two valued logic from the beginning. Corporate elites, Democrats, people in the news media, we're the good guys. Trump and his supporters, they're the bad guys. It was 4 years of that. So I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm understanding this. I would like to go a little deeper. So I went back and reread Language and Thought in Action. And I was seeing examples of what old SI was talking about day in and day out. So now, when it comes to Language and Thought in Action, I have a pretty good idea what's in here. The ladder of abstraction is a very, very important component to understanding this book. I'm going to be talking about that later. So, all in all, that's probably the reason I didn't remember reading it. There is a third, extremely far-fetched possibility that between 2018 and 2020 sometime, I was abducted by a UFO. And they conducted experiments on me, and they wiped my memory. And then they dropped me back down here in my apartment. And of course I wouldn't remember anything. That really is a silly idea. No. Ooh, why did that happen all of a sudden? Have a good one.
I want my money.